Class with a story. When I was growing up, there was a man in 770 whose name was Rabbi Shimon Goldman. He may have descendants in this room. He was a son-in-law of a great chassid named Rabbi Yochanan Gordon. Rabbi Yochanan Gordon, the Rebbe liked him. The Rebbe Pashut liked him. It seems like he was special. The Frierdiker Rebbe said, "Meine Yedidim were Yochanan Gordon and Bedel Chaskin." Yochanan Gordon would get up twice in 770 and make a speech. But when he made a speech, he had to put on a shtreimel. That was the shtick. He had to put on a shtreimel. The Rebbe would not let him talk, they put on a shtreimel. If there was no shtreimel in 770, he had to go find one. When did he speak? The first time he spoke was Simchas Torah. Because he was the Gabbai. It's Rosh Hashanah Bereshis. He was the Gabbai. And they used to sell mitzvahs. Rosh Hashanah Bereshis, for the whole year, they sold the mitzvahs. Hag B'Galila, different schusim. So he had to get up by the Rebbe and sell the mitzvahs by the Fabrengen. Before he sold the mitzvahs, the Rebbe wanted him to say Dvar Torah. To say Dvar Torah in front of the Rebbe is not so pashut. He had to put on a shtreimel, Rabbi Yochanan did, and he would say Dvar Torah. The second time was Pashas Mishpatim, which is next Matzah Shabbos. Pashas Mishpatim was Im Kesef Talva. Rabbi Yochanan Gordon had a gemach. The gemach was called Gemilas Chasadim Shem Rei Shabbos. It gave huge. It didn't have so much money, but it gave a lot of loans. And Rabbi Yochanan Gordon was the head of this gemach, and he would get up and announce that there's going to be a fundraiser every year. Shabbos Mishpatim Im Kesef Talva, he would make a fundraiser, and the Rebbe would ask him to announce the fundraiser, but he didn't. A lot of people made announcements to 770. But he had to say a Dvar Torah, and then he made the announcement, and the Rebbe made him put on a shtreimel. When Rabbi Yochanan passed away, this job was split in half. The Gaboyim took the shtreimel of Shabbos Bereshis. It used to be a Yid named Moshe Pinchas Katz, who obviously, he passed away 40 years ago. And Moshe Pinchas Katz was such a Shena Yid. He had only one son, he has only one son, who has mostly daughters. But he was a very special, he was a Shena Yid given, a Polish, a Zezer Shena. He's such a pleasant man. He was very chassidish, a very big Talmid Chacham, but he was so pleasant. He would do it. Then when he passed away, Rabbi Shia Pinson Olav Shalom did it. But the Gemilas Chasadim stayed by Shimon Goldman. Rabbi Shimon Goldman Olav Shalom, he kept the gemach, and he would every year Shabbos Pashas Mishpatim get up by the Rebbe, and he would put on a shtreimel, say Dvar Torah, and he would announce the Gemilas Chasadim. Rabbi Yochanan, his father-in-law, trembled every time he had to open his mouth in front of the Rebbe. He was a big chassid. So he was very prepared. The guy would spend maybe weeks or months preparing each Dvar Torah. Rabbi Yochanan, Olav Shalom. Rabbi Yochanan Gordon, who passed away in 1970 in Tafshin Lamed, I think. And every one of his drashas was chosen. He chose the words carefully, Pashut. And he wrote notes. Rabbi Yochanan Gordon had notes of his Divrei Torah. Every time he had to speak by the Rebbe, which was twice a year, he had to come up with a new vart, where he would say it in front of the Rebbe, and then he'd make his announcement. I don't know if he did it every time, but B'derech Kal he would tell stories. Rabbi Yochanan. Shimon Goldman, Olav Shalom, had Rabbi Yochanan's notes. So Shimon Goldman's Dvar Torahs were really, he would repeat what his father-in-law said. And it was okay, because most of the people who were listening to Shimon Goldman never remembered Rabbi Yochanan. I was 4 when he passed away, you understand? So a lot of the Dvar Torahs that Harav Shimon Goldman said by the Rebbe, Pashas Mishpatim, were repeats of the Divrei Torah that Rabbi Yochanan had wrote on the notes and said before he passed away. One of the stories that I heard myself from Rabbi Shimon Goldman, heard it from his father, Rabbi Yochanan Gordon, that was said by the Rebbe, Shas Pashas Mishpatim, one of the years that I was in yeshiva, is the following story. That there was once a Fabrengen in Poland, and there was a big chassid, his name was Rebbetzin Yitzchak Masbet. His last name is Gerevich, Horowitz. Mrs. Gerevich from Seminary Aleph is married to his grandson, his son's son. Mrs. Groner, Rebbetzin Groner, is his granddaughter. Yeah, Rebbetzin Groner's father is Tzemach Gerevich, is the son of Yitzchak Masbet. Yitzchak Masbet was a Gadol B'Yisrael. He was a Gon and a chassid. I mean, the Frierdiker Rebbe even called him a tzaddik once. He was an incredibly great chassid. He was very connected to the Frierdiker Rebbe, extremely connected to the Frierdiker Rebbe. So once by Verbringen of the Frierdiker Rebbe, Itche the Masmed got shikker. He drank enough alcohol to get shikker, get drunk. And when he was loose, he gets up on the Frierdiker Rebbe and he says, he talks to the Frierdiker Rebbe. And remember, I'm repeating it to you the way Shimon said it, the way I heard it from Shimon Gomer 40 years ago. Rebbe Goyel Tzedek, Rebbe righteous redeemer, Itche will reden. Yitzchak wants to speak. He wanted to speak in front of the Rebbe. He didn't want to say, I, Itche will reden. So the Frierdiker Rebbe says in Yiddish, I don't want to hear. So Itche the Masmid says, but I want to say it has to do with the Rebbe. So the Frierdiker Rebbe says, if it has to do with me, I know already. That's the end of the story. So the Rebbe is not letting him speak, so he stopped drinking alcohol. Verbringen went on for a little longer. He began to sober up. And then the Frierdiker Rebbe turns to him after he was sober and says, Nu Rabbi Yitzchak, now you can tell your story. Now that he wasn't shikir. So he tells the Frierdiker Rebbe, Itzter ken itchen ishrei. Now Yitzchak can't speak. Because when he was shikir, he had enough chutzpah to speak in front of the Rebbe. But Itzter ken itchen ishrei. So the story was never told. The minute the Verbringen was over, you can imagine what happened. The whole Bab of Chassidim. What's the story? So this was the story that Itche the Masmid wanted to tell the Frierdiker Rebbe, and the Frierdiker Rebbe told him straight out, if I do it with me, I know it already. The Mezritcher Maggid said that Mashiach is going to come either from his oldest Talmud or his youngest Talmud. Mashiach is going to be a descendant of the great oldest Talmidei Maggid or the youngest Talmidei Maggid. Who was the oldest Talmidei Maggid? Reb Nachman Chernobyler. Who was the youngest Talmidei Maggid? The Alter Rebbe. So the Alter Rebbe decided that he wants to make a shidduch with the Nachman Chernobyler, and between the two of them, they'll bring out the Neshama Mashiach that came. So he traveled to Chernobyl for Shabbos. The problem was, the Nachman Chernobyl children were all married, and his grandchildren were all very little, so there was nobody in the age of shidduchim. So he came to Chernobyl, he spent the Shabbos. Motzei Shabbos, they went to the well to get water to drink a kais chamin because of the Maismet Be'er Shal Miriam. They went to the well, and the Nachman Chernobyler, who was an old man, insisted on filling up the water himself, carrying the buckets. The Alter Rebbe was much younger than him, but he was Machabed the Alter Rebbe. Alter Rebbe was at least 20 years younger than him, maybe 25. The dates, tough pay. He was either 20 or 25 years old, much older than Alter Rebbe. But the Nachman Chernobyler was Machabed the Alter Rebbe. Anyway, they went to the well, they got the water, they walked back, but they were talking. And the conversation got so carried away, they stood a whole night in the middle of the market. The Nachman Chernobyler never put the pails down, holding 2 pails of water on her shoulder, talking. The first Yidden got up Sunday morning to go to Vasikin, and they see their Rebbe standing, still holding the 2, he hadn't put them down. And a young man is talking, and the Rebbe is listening, so before you know it, the whole Kehillah is standing around. And when they realized they had company, they went back to the apartment, they cooked up the water, they drank a glass of tea, and then Nachman Chernobyler says to the Alter Rebbe, you came for a reason. Why did you come? So the Alter Rebbe said, I want to do a shidduch with you. So Nachman Chernobyler says, all my children are married, all my grandchildren are babies. So Alter Rebbe says, let's make a shidduch between the kinderlach, and they'll get up, they'll get married, they'll get older married. So Nachman Chernobyler said, fine. Then Nachman Chernobyler, all of his children lived with him, but he was very poor. So instead of every one of his children having their own house, every one of his children had a room, and all the grandchildren slept in like 2 dormitories. All the girls were in one, and all the boys were in the other, from various different children. They walked into the cheder where the little boys were sleeping. The Alter Rebbe went with Nachman Chernobyler from bed to bed, looking at these children with a little candle. And he stopped by one whose name was Rabbi Yisrael Cherkasser. Rabbi Yisrael Cherkasser was a famous Hasidic Rebbe. He was the son of the Matla Chernobyler. And after that, he was 3 or 4. I want this one. Nachman says, okay. They walked out, and they woke up his father, the Matla Chernobyler. And the Nachman Chernobyler, the Alter Rebbe, made a kinyan for Etnoim. The Mittler Rebbe's daughter, who was also 2 or 3, with Nachman Chernobyler's grandson, who was a little younger. And they went their separate ways. The Nachman Chernobyler passes away. And the Baruch of Mezhebush, the great Baruch Mezhebush, Baal Shem Tov's grandson, came to Chernobyl. And he sees a little boy running around, and he likes what he sees. So he goes over to Matla Chernobyl and says, Rematel, Burich, he used to talk about himself in third person. Burich will team mitach shidduch. Burich wants to make with you a shidduch. By the way, that girl, if she wants to come only to Q&A, she's not entitled. This is a class. This is not, if she only went for Q&A, I'm not invited. I don't know what she is. But this is a class. Sometimes Q&A, sometimes it's gashus. You can't come just for the Q&A. I'm not going to let her in. Tell her, it's not right. I don't know who she is, but she's a visitor. I'm with a dealer. I don't know who she is, but that's not the way this works. Anyway, I'm just please tell her what I said. So he said, Burich v'tim mitach hashidduch. Now Burich was the Baal Shem Tov's grandson. Everybody loved the Burich. So the Matel, of course. So the Baruch says to the Baruch says to the Matel, no, but I want this little boy. So the Matel says, this little boy you can't have, because he's taken. What do you mean he's taken? So the Alter Rebbe came here and he made a shidduch when they were babies. The Baruch didn't like the Alter Rebbe. It was a big menagid. It's the brechen dem shidduch. I'll break the shidduch. The Matel didn't like the Alter Rebbe either so much. He says, but my father made the shidduch, and I'm not messing with my father's shidduch. So the Baruch says to the Matel, guy from Tzion, go to your father's Tzion, tell him what you're doing, you break the shidduch, and you make a shidduch with the Einik of the Heilige Baal Shem Tov himself. The Baruch. Long story. Chabad, they didn't like Chabad at all. Wow, Chabad really made them nervous. Chabad. It's a miracle they had a few friends left, you know what I'm saying? Akitze, that Matel goes to his father's Tzion, and he comes back, and he doesn't say anything. So the Baruch says, Nie wusste der Tate gesucht, what did your father say? Nicht brechen dem shidduch, not to break the shidduch. Afille fa Burich, even for Burich, Baal Shem Tov's grandson. So there's two versions to the story. I forgot which one he said. One version is Le'ela mikol berchosa v'shirasa sehecha for alla baruchs. Le'ela, it's higher than all the baruchs. This is higher than baruch. Now the other girsa, I think he told this girsa. The other girsa is Afille fa hindet baruch. You shouldn't break the shidduch even for 100 baruchs. Anyway, they got married. The Chernobyl and the Alter Rebbe made a shidduch. The chasna was in Chernobyl. The Alter Rebbe traveled all the way to Chernobyl for the chasna. And the Alter Rebbe's middle Rebbe had a daughter. I think her name was Chana, but I could be wrong. She married Rabbi Yankov Solchekasa. They lived in Lubavitch for many years, by the Alter Rebbe, by the Mittler Rebbe. Eventually he became a Rebbe. He was a Polish Rebbe. Chabad did not infect him. he was by the Alter Rebbe for years, by the Mittler Rebbe for years, but he remained a Chernobyl Rebbe. He was a famous Rebbe, Solchekasa. He didn't have any sons. He had only daughters. The Tzemach Tzedek wanted to make a shidduch with him for the same reason, to continue this chain. The oldest and the youngest, Mashiach should come from it. So the Tzemach Tzedek had a son whose name was Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak, after whom the Friedrich Rebbe is named. And he married the Chekasa's daughter. So these two families intermarried a second time. Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak, who was a Chabad, he was Tzemach Tzedek's chassid, when he got married, he moved away. He moved to the Chernobyl region. And he ended up becoming a Polish Rebbe. In other words, we lost. They won, you know. The Chekasa remained a Polish Rebbe, and the Tzemach Tzedek's son, Rabbi Yosef, became a Polish Rebbe, which is another story. And they had a daughter. And that daughter's name was Shterna Sara, whose yahrzeit is today. The Friedrich Rebbe's mother. So they decided to make a shidduch the third time. The Rebbe Rashab married the Rebbe in Shterna Sara. So this shidduch happened 3 times over. In other words, the Alter Rebbe's mishpacha and the Chernobyl mishpacha, they got married. A son and a daughter got married again, and then a son and a daughter got married a third time. And they had one son, the Friedrich Rebbe. And that's why the Bishop of the Masmid said, the Rebbe Goyal said, the Rebbe, righteous Redeemer, because each of the Masmid was saying, you are the only product of this shidduch 3 times over, for sure you're Mashiach. This is what he wanted to say. And the Friedrich Rebbe said, if it's negeah to me, I know it already, I don't need your speeches. And he wouldn't let him tell the story in front of him. But Rabbi Shimon Goldman told it in front of the Rebbe. Just the way I'm telling it, you spoke in Yiddish, but his Shved also told it. And I remember him telling the story. The Rebbe would make believe he doesn't hear what he's saying, but it was like, wow, to tell that kind of a story in front of the Rebbe. I'm telling you this story because the Rebbe's Shterna Sara's yahrzeit is today. She was a Bas Kedosh Eliyah. The Rebbe's Shterna Sara was the daughter of the holiest tzaddikim. The Alter Rebbe, the Mittler Rebbe, the Tzemach Tzedek, the Chernobyl Rebbe, the Tenachim Chernobyl He was fat from Haman Yehesh Meirab. Think about it. He was fat from Yehesh Meirab. I'm fat from Beit Min Mezoinus. He was fat. But Haman Yehesh Meirab was a tzaddik gomer. Reb Nachum Shenabel. And she was a big niyuchesed. She was mamish akadosha meracham u'meleida. Their shidduch was made when they were babies. There were 4. The Tzemach Tzedek was still alive when they made their shidduch. And they wrote tnoim. They wrote conditions. And each side, that means the Rebbe Marash and the Avrucher, they were brothers. Rebbe Yitzchak Avrucher had to put down 1,000 rubles for Nadan, which was a lot of money. And you'd see on the tnoim, it says on the bottom, Gamani, also I am going to participate in the tnoim. I'm going to give 500 rubles, and then it says one word, Menachem. Tzemach Tzedek sign. They have the copy, they have the original copy of that Shtat Noim, where you could see how each side gave 1,000 rubles to the young couple, and the Tzemach Tzedek, who was then very old, writes, I'm also going to be mishtatev in the Naden, I'm going to give 500 rubles, Menachem, as Eichas Meterut. They got married in Avruch. It was a big politics. The Rebbe Marash wanted the chasna to be in Lubavitch. The Rebbe Marash didn't go to the chasna. He made a chasna in Lubavitch with chassidim and no chasna kala. It's a long story. It's not for now. Right after Sheva Barachas, they came to live in Lubavitch. Right after Shabbos, it was very hard for her. Because usually when a young couple got married, and remember they got married when they were 14, 15, they were little kids, you live by the Kala's family. Why? The chassan, you're talking about these kinds of families, they were big tzaddikim, they were big Talmidei Chacham, they said all day bis medrash. But a girl needs her mother, especially if she's having babies. So traditionally, that's how it was. If you know outside Lubavitch, where people live normal lives, you don't run away from your family, go on shlichus, when boys and girls get married, they live near the mother's family, the wife's family. So a boy gets married to a girl, he has to live in the neighborhood where his wife's family lives. That's how it is. It's a maternal society. If you go to Williamsburg, the girls live next to their mothers and the boys have to move. That's how it is. That's how it always was. But one of the conditions of the chasana was that the Rebbe Rashab needed the Rebbe Marash, who was his father, but he was also his Rebbe. The Rebbe Marash needed his father, and the Avrucher agreed. The Mechutin agreed that the wedding took place in Avruch right after Sheva Barachas. They came to live in Lubavitch. It was very difficult for her. She was very lonely. And she was married to a tzaddik. Being married to a tzaddik is not fun, trust me. I'm sure he never screamed at her, and he was very nice to her, but he was kind of busy, you know what I'm saying? Even before he was a Rebbe. Allah has kama v'kama afterwards. And she kept on losing her pregnancies. People say she had 3 or 4 miscarriages. She kept on losing her pregnancies. She was really having a very hard time of it. She was also very self-conscious, because she was very little. She was very petite. Like the Rebbetzin Chaimushka, they say, was very small. In the whole Shterna family, everyone was very tall. She was very little. She was very self-conscious. And I read someplace that the Rebbe Marash once saw her and said to her, Zor sich nicht, kleine Bäume geben gute Frucht, don't feel bad, the small trees have the nicest fruit. She was a Vedic Rebbe's mother. Anyway, she had a number of miscarriages. I don't know how many. It was very hard for her. It really was very hard for her. Simchas Teda Tafresh Mem. Simchas Teda in the year 1879 to 1880 Tafresh Mem. She went to shul. Everybody went to shul, Simchas Teda. And of course, Simchas Teda, they would move away the curtains so the women could see the dancing. And she's in shul, and she's watching all the young mothers with their kids, and she's alone. So she starts to cry in shul. But she doesn't want to cry in front of her Simchas Teda, so she puts her head down and she falls asleep. And she has a dream. She sees a few men. I don't know if she knew them all or knew some of them. But they said to her that she should give 24 ruble to tzedakah from her own money, and she'll be zoicha to have a good son. 24 ruble was money. It wasn't 10 cents, but it wasn't $1 million. She had 24 ruble from her own money, and she'll be zoicha to have a good son. And she wakes up. That afternoon, her husband comes home from shul, the Rebbe Rashab. But it was Simchas Teda, and the Rebbe Rashab was young. So as much as you could say such oisis, he was quite freilach, he was quite shikir. So he didn't walk into the house. He rolled into the house. He's so happy. And when he pops up, he looks at his wife, and she looks like it's Yom Kippur. She's so earnest. And he takes one look at the Rebbetzin, and he says to her, Simchas Teda, how do you look at this Simchas Teda? So she tells him, I had a dream. And the Rebbe Rashab right away stops his simcha, and they take it very seriously. She repeats the dream to him, and they went together to the Rebbe Marash, to their father, the Rebbe Rashab's father, to tell him the dream. And the Rebbe Rashab told him what it was. At least one of them was the Tzemach Tzedek. The people that they saw in the dreams were the earlier Rebbeim, and he says, you should do it. But she had no money. She had a footer. One of the gifts she got when she got married was a fur coat, which was worth a lot of money. She pawned it, and she gave the 24 ruble to tzedakah. And the Fiedeke was born that year. When she would tell the story, she would finish, Un yenem yar is gebaring geworden. That year, the Fiedeke was born. They had only one child. And the shmua is that the truth is that she was already pregnant. She had pregnant Rosh Hashanah, Zezog, and the people who know the family. I heard it from somebody, I heard it from one of the Mishpacha members. That the Fiedeke was born. The Fiedeke was named after her father, who had passed away that year, Yossi Yitzchak. She was the only child that she would have. The relationship that she had with her husband, with the Rebbe Rashab, is very, very interesting. It's really very interesting. If I had to explain it in Das Tachten terms, the Rebbe Rashab was deeply dependent on his wife. He needed her. The Rebbe Rashab never traveled alone. He always traveled with his wife. Now you must understand, that Rebbe Marash passed away, the Fiedeke Rebbe was 2 years and 4 months old. He was a little baby. The first year after the Rebbe Marash passed away, the Rebbe Rashab basically lived in his father's room. He slept there. He lived in his father's cheder. After that first year, he began to get sick. The Rebbe Rashab was so sick. Twice in that 10-year span, he almost lost his life. And he traveled a lot for doctors. He also traveled a lot to go to places where they had different kinds of healing, mineral baths and other kinds of things like that. And he also traveled for warm climates. And he always took her. So the little Beichko, the Fiedeke Rebbe, was left alone. Fiedeke Rebbe had a really hard life. He really had from the beginning to the end, his life was so hard. And he was such a positive man, it's not normal. The Fiedeke Rebbe had a very hard childhood. Fiedeke Rebbe writes in a Sikha, which at the ages of 9 and 11, I didn't have a father. 9 to 11, I didn't have a father, he writes. They traveled a lot. When they left him with the Baba, with the Rebbetzin Rivke, whose yahrzeit was Yud Shvat. She was young, and she was healthy, and she was a big tzidkonis. She did a good job. She took care of the Fiedeke Rebbe, but it wasn't his mother. And they traveled during those 10 years, they probably were away 2 or 3 years if you add it all up. One time, they took the Fiedeke Rebbe along on a trip. It was like a big deal. They took him along. But Azoi, they traveled. And even after the Rebbe Rashab accepted the Nesius and he became a big Rebbe, and he stopped being sick from the stresses of becoming a Rebbe, from what I am able to surmise, when the Rebbe Rashab traveled, he traveled with the Rebbetzin always. The Rebbetzin Shana and the Rebbe Rashab were extremely close. Ad kedei kach, that the Fiedeke Rebbe told our Rebbe, around the year 1902, 1903, the Rebbe Rashab went through a period, in the words of the Rebbe, where he was very sad. It was the Hipcha Simcha. By a Rebbe, it's hard to say the word depressed, but the Rebbe Rashab was struggling with stuff. And he went to Vienna for 7 months. You know that, right? And he met Freud, he met Sigmund Freud a couple of times. The Rebbe Rashab went to talk over his issues with the Rebbe Freud. And people get very upset when I tell the story. How could a Rebbe suffer from mental illness? The Rebbe told the story by Fabrengen. The Rebbe told the story. He didn't have to tell it, he told it. So you can have kashas on the Rebbe why we have to know the story, but the fact is, I'm not telling you a secret from Cheder. The Rebbe told the story by Fabrengen. So the Fiedeke Rebbe says to our Rebbe, Fiedeke Rebbe was already 22 then. He says, my father went through this state of depression, and I knew nothing about it. My father didn't share with me at all. And at Allah's that sailed the mama, he told everything to my mother. The Rebbe Rashab's confidant was his wife. The Rebbe Rashab was a Hasidic preacher, was such a holy person. But the Rebbetzin Shterna Sara was incredibly important to him. Incredibly important to him. The Rebbe Rashab apparently, in many ways, leaned on his Rebbetzin. It's fascinating. And by the way, our Rebbe and our Rebbetzin, we didn't understand it till after Chof Beishvat. We didn't realize how important the Rebbetzin was until the Rebbetzin wasn't there. The Rebbetzin was so important to the Rebbe. They didn't spend a lot of time together, but they were so connected. The Rebbe needed the Rebbetzin so much. And the Rebbe Rashab and the Rebbetzin Shterna Sara were that kind. They were so close. And whenever he traveled, you traveled with him. When the Rebbetzin Rivka passed away, Her passing was really interesting. She passed away on Friday.
Rebbetzin.
Huh?
Rebbetzin, Sara.
No, Rebbetzin Ifke, her mother-in-law. So her parents, his parents, his son, the Rebbe Rashab and the Rebbetzin were in France. They were in Menton. And at the beginning of the week, she started to feel weak. She was 80 years old. She was an old lady. In those days, that was very old. So the Fidik wrote a telegram to his parents that the Rebbe, your mother's not feeling well. You should think about maybe shortening your trip. And as the week got later and she started getting sicker, he wrote other telegrams saying, maybe you should think about coming home this week, rushing them up a little bit. But towards the end of the week, Thursday, Friday, she started to feel better. So if Rebbe wrote, maybe you could stay till after Shabbos. Paltiel, she passed away on Friday. And the story was that the Rebbe used to go into her all the time. And he went into her, he gave her a siddur to daven. And when she finished davening, she asked for a glass of water. We know that the three Rebbetzins, the Rebbetzin Sara and the Rebbetzin Rivka and the Rebbetzin Chayamushka asked for a glass of water. They made a shakal niyabedvari right before the neshama left. And the Rebbetzin Rivka asked him for a glass of water, and he gave her a glass of water, and she made a bracha. I think she said, "Das mamachaya gewesen." The Rebbe turned around to put the siddur down. When he turned back, she was gone. So it was a very short Friday. Yud Shvat, a short Friday. So he wrote 3 telegrams. One telegram said, "You have to think about coming home quickly." Then he waited like an hour and says, "Come home right away." And then the 3rd telegram which said, "No point in coming home." And the Rebbe Rashab understood that his mother passed. So he stayed in Menton. He sat Shiva in Menton. The Levi was on Friday. The Fidik buried the Rebbetzin Ifke. But the Rebbe Rashab was married twice. His first wife lasted 3 months and then she passed away. And she's buried in Lubavitch, in the oil of the women. And you're not allowed to bury 2 women who are married to the same man in the same cemetery. So the Fidik put the Rebbetzin Ifke in the men's side, head to head with the Rebbe Marash. The Rebbetzin Ifke is buried in the men's section of the cemetery. There's a matzeva for her. Now you can go visit Lubavitch. Right after Shabbos, he got on a train and he went to see his father, to Menachem Oval. When he met his father, the first words out of his father's mouth were, "Wo ist dir gelegt? Where did you move her? Where did you bury her?" So the Fidik Rebbe said, "Ich habe gelegt zu Koppens." I put her head to head with the Rebbe Marash. And the Rebbe Rashab was very happy, and he told his son, "Eib du was dir gelegt, and the Eil von the Noshim, wollte ich gerucht, afilu onatnai." If you had buried her in the section where the Rebbetzins are buried, I would have moved her, even if you didn't make a condition that you could remove her guf kaddish. I forgot to say 2 things, by the way. By her levaya, the Rebbetzin Ifke's levaya, whose yahrzeit was Yud Shvat, the Fidik Rebbe was so upset that he couldn't walk. He was so upset. So 2 bocharim were holding him. And as they're walking to or from the Levi, they heard the Rebbe Fidik Rebbe mutter under his breath, a guest in Gan Eden of Shabbos. A guest in Gan Eden for Shabbos. The Fidik Rebbe knew that his grandmother was giving Gan Eden before Shabbos. And then a few minutes later he muttered, "The kroin von the mishpache is up." The crown was lifted from the family. His grandmother was very important. So Sunday he meets his parents, and he describes how she passed away. And the Rebbe Shterna Sara listened very carefully. And as soon as he finished, she clapped her hands and said, halavai b'mir, I wish I passed away the same way. And that's exactly what happened, exactly what happened. When the Rebbe Rasha passed away, the Fidik Rebbe became Rebbe. Rebbe Shterna was in the house. She was very important to the Fidik Rebbe, the Rebbe's mama. They called her the Alta Rebbetzin. And there's a story that a Yid by the name of Simcha Gorodetsky was a big chassid. That's a big chassid. Went into the Fidik Rebbe to Yechidus. He had been traveling all over Russia. He came into Fidik Rebbe Yechidus and he had messages from people. But every message was terrible. People lost their job, it was under the communists already. If you were from, they took away your house, took away your parnasa, took away. People were suffering. And everybody complained, and they told the Fidik Rebbe. So he walks in and he starts to list the complaints. And the Fidik Rebbe starts to cry, gefelach. He finishes crying, okay, next message, and again he cries. After a few messages, if Simcha decides, I'm not going to tell the Rebbe, this is going to, because he was crying till there was no more tears left. And the Fidik Rebbe said, people gave you a shlichus, you must give over the messages. And the Rebbe cried. When he walked out of the room, there was a puddle of tears on the floor. He walked out of Yechidus, he looked like a ghost. He was ashen. Imagine watching a Rebbe cry. Every person made him cry again. Who does he bump into? The Fidik Rebbe's mother. And she takes one look at him and says, Simcha, what happened? He looked terrible. So he tells her what happened. Every person that I mentioned, he's crying again. So the Rebbetzin Shterna Sara said, you know, I gave birth to this man. I raised this person. She said, I don't know what happened to him. As soon as he became a Rebbe, like a different person. He says, every night after Yechidus, there's a puddle of tears on the floor. Every night after Yechidus, there's a puddle of tears on the floor. And there's also another word, that they once had a difference, Frierdiker Rebbe and his mother. And the Rebbe Shterna Sara said, I'm the wife of the Rebbe Rashab. The wife of a Rebbe is a Rebbe. I'm the wife of a Rebbe is a Rebbe. But macht good about her son. He's good. I'm talking. The wife of a Rebbe is a Rebbe, but the Frierdiker Rebbe is okay. You know, you don't say that. Now, one of the more powerful stories with her is that when the Frierdiker was arrested, they came in the middle of the night and they made noise. And the Frierdiker Rebbe said to them, you better be quiet. Because if you're not quiet, you're going to wake up my mother. And I'm telling you, you do not want her to wake up because you're going to have a problem on your hands. That they were the shoyim, they were yidden. But they were such a schlechte Menschen, you know. So what? You know, so I'll make your mother upset also. They didn't care. They woke her up. She came out of her room and she saw what's going on and she became hysterical. The Frierdiker Rebbe describes it in the Shemus HaMaiser. And she started screaming to her husband. The Rebbe Rashab had passed away 7 years before. And she starts to scream, my man! She started screaming to the Rebbe Rashab, my husband, look where they're taking your son. She became completely hysterical. And she put her hands out and she says to Lulav and Nachman, take me, leave alone my son. She was so upset. And she got so upset that as big Rishoyim as they were, she spun them out. They didn't understand. She started screaming to the Rebbe Rashab, to her husband, and she freaked them out. And these were people who were not, these people killed people with impunity, but now they were very shaken up. So the Frierdiker Rebbe says to them, I told you, if you'll allow me, I'll take her into another room and I'll calm her down. And they made the terrible mistake of letting him do it. Because the minute that door closed, she was mitamol, everything was good. And the Rebbe was able to give her instructions without them overhearing. That probably helped save his life. She was the Frierdiker Rebbe's mother. She wasn't, you know what I'm saying, a hysterical grandmother. The minute the door closed, the Frierdiker Rebbe says, okay, now listen. And he had an opportunity right under their noses to give instruction. They didn't chapsach, they didn't realize. So she was there when he was arrested. She was there when he was liberated. She was there when they left Russia. Everything she was. She was by the Rebbe's chassan, and she was the whole time. She was the senior matriarch. She was a real Rebbetzin. She was very well respected. The Frierdiker Rebbe respected her. Chassidim respected her. She was a very important part of Lubavitch in Riga, in Russia, and in Latvia, and in Poland. She came to America, yeah. When the bombs were falling, in the beginning of the Second War, the Nazis dropped bombs. But they dropped the bombs dafka on the Jewish neighborhoods in Warsaw. Frierdiker Rebbe describes buildings blowing up and body parts. The rishish was unbelievable. So the Rebbe Shterna was very, very afraid. She was very afraid. She was out of her mind afraid. And she kept on saying, Nehmt mich zum Sohn, take me to my son, take me to my son. And they saw b'muchash that if she was near the Frierdiker Rebbe, she was completely calm. Imagine, if she was near the Frierdiker Rebbe, she was completely calm. She knew with a certitude that you have no idea that no bomb is going to hurt her son. She knew she understood the Frierdiker Rebbe, no bomb is going to touch. So she would be very upset, agitated. The minute she was near the Frierdiker Rebbe, you saw her pasha be calm. The Frierdiker Rebbe spent that Tishrei in Warsaw, and then they left. They left through Germany. They ended up in Riga, and then from Riga he went to Stockholm. From Stockholm came to New York. The Frierdiker Rebbe did not leave to New York for many months because she broke her hip. And she was not able to travel. And I think one of the steps in the travel was actually with an airplane, and she couldn't get on a plane. And the Rebbe was not going to travel without his mother. He delayed this trip for several months, which was mamish dangerous, because he wouldn't travel without her. On the mama, when she was good enough to travel, they left for America. She was on the ship with the Rebbe. She came to New York. And when the Rebbe bought 770, I've been in the Frierdiker Rebbe's apartment as a child, when there were no locks on the doors. We walked around like it was a door. I was in Frierdiker Rebbe's office. I could have opened the doors and taken out Sfarim. There was no locks. Now everything is locked by 1,000 locks. So there's 2 bedrooms. There's 1 bedroom with 2 beds. That's the Rebbe's bedroom. And there's another bedroom, I think it has 1 or 2 beds, but that's the Rebbetzin bedroom. No one has slept in that bed in 83 years. She died in 1942. Now I heard that when the Rebbe wasn't well in Tafshan Lamed Ches in 1977, so the Rebbe stayed in 770 till the Chodesh Kislev. That entire time, the Rebbetzin Chaya Mushka slept in her grandmother's bed, not in her mother's bed, in her grandmother's bed. She slept in the Rebbetzin Shterna Sara's bed. She came to America with the Frierdiker Rebbe, and she passed away in 1942. But listen to this: it was the only time the Frierdiker Rebbe left New York. In other words, just like the Rebbe Rashab was not when his mother passed away, neither was the Frierdiker when his mother passed away. He was in Chicago, big in Chicago. And he went there to be me'oida Yidden for Yiddishkeit. She passed away not on Friday, but on Shabbos. Who was there? Our Rebbe. She wasn't finished davening, she was holding nishmas. And she asked the Rebbe for a glass of water. The Rebbe gave a glass of water, she made a bracha shakal nibedvarei. I think, maybe I'm wrong about this detail, I think she gave the Rebbe a bracha. And she passed away in the middle of davening. Exactly the way her mother-in-law passed, that's exactly how she passed. Being near the next Rebbe, in the middle of davening, after making a bracha shakal. Motzei Shabbos, they told Chicago, the Rebbe passed, the mother passed. The Rabbonim in Chicago paskin that the Frierdiker Rebbe should stay in Chicago and continue Yechidus. That's how important that trip was. And the Rebbe didn't come back. The Frierdiker went back till the next day, till whatever it is, Sunday night. The Rebbe went on Sunday and he bought the plot. The cemetery in Montefiore in Queens was bought for her. Agudas Chassidic Chabad has a chelka on Long Island, which goes back maybe 100 years, maybe more. And there was room in that chelk. There was place to bury her. But when she passed away, the Rebbe bought a new chelk. And he put down $1,000, which was a lot of money in 1942, and he bought the chelk. Why did he buy the chelka? There's 2 reasons that people give, neither of which I understand completely. But one of them was that the plan was that the Frierdiker would visit his mother. In those days, to go to Staten Island, you had to go on a boat. There was no bridge. The Verrazano hadn't yet been built. But Brooklyn and Queens are connected, so they thought it would be easier. Paltiel, not only did the Frierdiker Rebbe not go to her levaya, he never visited her cemetery, her place. And the understanding was that it was really more emotional. Frierdiker Rebbe was a very emotional man, and he was worried about his own emotions, and he can get too upset. So he didn't go not to the levaya and not to the oil. When the Rebbe came back from Chicago, our Rebbe walked on the train to greet him. This is 2 generations. When the Rebbe Tzedivka passed away, and the Rebbe Yatzkam tells his father, the Rebbe Rashab, the first question was, where'd you put her? A personal question. When our Rebbe got on the train to see the Frierdiker Rebbe, the first words out of the Frierdiker Rebbe's mouth was, Dorten is given an emes hazaza. There in Chicago, there was a real Hisaydidus. It tells you the difference between the Frierdiker Rebbe and the Rebbe and the early Rabbeim. The Frierdiker Rebbe did not have a private life. His mother's laying, waiting for him to come back. They didn't even bury her yet. And the first thing out of his mouth was about the shlichus. He didn't think about themselves. It's so upsetting. The first words that the Rebbe told the Frierdiker told the Rebbe, he didn't ask any questions. What happened? How did it happen? Dorten is given an in Chicago, the shlichus worked. Whatever I had to do, I did. But it's in America, the Rebbeim threw themselves away. I think more than any other Rebbe. I just think doesn't have an equal. Now maybe it's wrong. Maybe the Rebbe doesn't like I'm saying it, but that's how it looks. The Levaya was on Monday. The Frierdiker Rebbe obviously at Shiva, and the Rebbe wrote down all the Menhagim of Avelis that he watched the Frierdiker Rebbe do then. But the Frierdiker Rebbe was not physically in a position to daven for the Yomid every day. So the Rebbe asked Shmuel Levittin to daven and say Kaddish. The Frierdiker Rebbe, when he was able to, said Kaddish, but the Shmuel davened for his mother. For that year, the whole year, Tavshin Beis. She passed away Yud Gimel, Shvat, Tavshin Beis. When the Rebbe became Rebbe, a couple of times in the early years, on Yud Gimel Shvat, the Rebbe would turn around and tell some stories about her, and he would give money for mashke that Shmuel should bring with the Bacharim for her yard site. One of the stories that Rebbe told about the Rebbe in Shterna Sara is the following story. The Rebbe Rashab had a cheder asfarim, had a room where he kept svarim, and also manuscripts, Kisvei Yad Kodesh, the Chassidus. The Kisvei Yad Kodesh were off limits. No one was allowed to see them. It was a secret. When the Rebbe Rashab would leave Lubavitch, they would sneak into the Cheder HaSforim and they would copy the Chassidus Yegamvit so they could have it. One of the copyists was his own wife. The Rebbe Sara helped the Chassidim steal the Chassidim from the Rebbe Rashab. And the Rebbe, in other words, she was a very Chassidish lady.
He wouldn't leave without her.
So there apparently were occasions when he did. Or whatever the case was, she would help steal the Chassidus from her own husband that the Chassidim should have. One final story which I love. The Rebbe didn't tell the story, but I saw it in some booklet.
Other story the Rebbe said?
The story I just told, the Rebbe said. The story I'm about to tell, the Rebbe didn't say. The Frierdiker Rebbe was in Perkesdorf. Frierdiker Rebbe was in a resort area in Austria, near Vienna, called Perkesdorf. And he went there because he wasn't well and he needed to recover, whatever it was. And a lot of the Gedalim Yisrael used to go to Perkesdorf. They used to say that in the summertime, Perkesdorf was the Yerushalayim of Europe. All the Gedalim went and all the Talmidim went. And the Minchas Elazar was there. The Munkach Rebbe was a very, very big tzaddik and a very, very big Gaon, was there. And the Frierdiker Rebbe came home one day and he announced that the next day, him and the Minchas Elazar were going to meet after davening and they were going to walk a spazier, they were going to walk and talk. So the Rebbe in Shterna Sara says to Frierdiker Rebbe, ich will him sehen, I want to see him. Minchas Elazar was a famous tzaddik and a famous Gaon. Our Rabbeim were extremely close to him. So the Frierdiker Rebbe said, we're going to walk on this avenue. You can stand any place you want and you'll see. So the next day, the Rebbe, Rayatz, the Frierdiker Rebbe, and the Minchas Elazar are walking, and suddenly Minchas Elazar stops, and he says to the Frierdiker Rebbe, Ich feel a ruach von Kedusha, I feel a spirit of holiness. And the Frierdiker Rebbe said, the Mama steht hinter dem Baum. My mother is standing behind the tree. Not bad, huh? Not bad, not bad. Okay, I'll see you when I see you.